Is that supposed to be a snake, or did a toddler get hold of a Sharpie while you were passing out drunk? The voice cut through the low hum of the server banks inside the Naval Command and Control Center. It was a sterile, blue-lit room, the nerve center of the base, filled with millions of dollars of equipment and men who believed they were the smartest people on Earth. Harold Beck did not look up. He kept his eyes on the floor buffer, his hands steady on the vibrating handle, guiding the machine in a slow, rhythmic arc over the linoleum. At 82 years old, Harold had learned that silence was often the loudest answer one could give, but today silence seemed only to provoke the man standing behind him. "Hey, I am talking to you, Pops. I asked about that ink." Lieutenant Commander Vance stepped into Harold's peripheral vision. Vance was young for his rank, a man who wore his uniform with the pristine crispness of someone who had spent his entire career in air-conditioned rooms fighting wars on screens. He held a styrofoam cup of coffee in one hand and pointed a manicured finger at Harold's forearm with the other. Harold paused the machine. The sudden silence of the motor seemed to suck the air out of the room. He slowly straightened his back, feeling the familiar pop of vertebrae that had carried too much weight for too many years. He looked at his own arm. The tattoo in question was faded. The ink bled into the crepe paper skin of his inner forearm. To the untrained eye, it looked like a jagged, nonsensical mess. A black diamond intersected by a crooked lightning bolt with 3 distinct, uneven dots beneath it. It was ugly. It was crude. It looked like prison work. "It is just a mark, sir," Harold said, his voice gravelly but soft. He gripped the handle of the buffer again, ready to move on. "Just a reminder." "A reminder of what?" "Bad decisions." Vance laughed, looking around at the 2 junior ensigns flanking him. They chuckled on cue, though one of them, a young woman named Ensign Miller, looked away, her eyes fixing on the digital map displayed on the main wall. "You know, we have regulations about professional appearance on the command deck," Vance continued. Stepping closer, he blocked Harold's path. "Even for the janitorial staff, that thing is an eyesore. It looks like gang tagging. You got a history you are not telling us about, Harold. Maybe some time in the state pen." Harold looked up, meeting Vance's eyes. The lieutenant commander's face was smooth, unmarred by wind or worry. Harold's face was a map of deep canyons and weathered ridges. "No prison, sir. Just work," Vance sneered, taking a sip of his coffee. "Right. Work. Well, cover it up. Roll down your sleeves. I do not want to see that scratchpad garbage while I am trying to coordinate fleet movements." "It is distracting." Harold hesitated. The command center was kept at a frigid 65 degrees to protect the servers, but physically, the work of wrestling the industrial buffer kept him warm. Rolling down his sleeves would make the next hour of labor unbearable. "With all due respect, sir, the regulation for contract maintenance allows for rolled sleeves when operating heavy machinery. Safety protocol, to prevent snagging." Vance's eyes narrowed. The air in the room shifted. It was one thing for the old janitor to be an eyesore. It was another for him to quote regulations to a senior officer. The playful mockery vanished, replaced by a cold, bureaucratic malice. "Are you quoting safety protocols to me?" Vance asked, his voice dropping an octave. "To the watch officer of this deck?" "I am just doing my job, sir. Your job is to clean the floor, not to debate uniform code with a lieutenant commander." Vance took a step forward, invading Harold's personal space. The smell of expensive cologne wafted off him, clashing with the scent of floor wax and old sweat. "And right now, I am questioning your judgment. In fact, I am questioning your clearance. If you have gang tattoos, that is a security risk. Who vetted you?" "I have been working this base for 15 years, Harold said. He did not step back. He stood his ground, his feet planted shoulder-width apart, a stance he had adopted decades ago and never unlearned. Times change. Standards change. Vance gestured to the 2 ensigns. "Miller, check his badge. Run it against the watch list. I want to know if our friend Harold here is actually authorized to be in the inner sanctum, or if someone in admin fell asleep at the wheel." Ensign Miller hesitated. "Sir, he's Mr. Beck. He cleans the comms room every Tuesday. He's never been an issue. I gave you a direct order, Ensign." Harold stood still as the young woman approached him. She looked apologetic, her movements tentative as she reached out for the laminated card clipped to Harold's breast pocket. Harold didn't move. He stared straight ahead, focusing on a blinking red light on a server rack across the room. He felt a strange detachment, a familiar coldness settling in his chest. It wasn't fear. He hadn't felt fear in a way that mattered since 1968. It was a profound, weary disappointment. The tattoo on his arm seemed to throb slightly, a phantom sensation. For a split second, the sterile blue light of the command center vanished. Harold wasn't standing on polished linoleum. He was knee-deep in black mud. The air wasn't conditioned. It was thick, wet, and smelling of rot and cordite. He looked down at his arm, not at the faded gray blur, but at fresh, angry skin, swollen and bleeding. A man named Needles, a corporal from Alabama with shaking hands but a steady heart, was wiping away the blood with a rag dipped in moonshine. "Don't move, Harry," Needles whispered. "This ink binds us. If we die in this hole, the Reaper needs to know who to send the bill to." The lightning bolt was jagged because the mortar rounds were walking closer, shaking the earth. The 3 dots represented the 3 men they had already lost that week. The memory vanished as quickly as it had come. Harold blinked. He was back in the command center. Ensign Miller was holding his badge, typing his ID number into her tablet. Vance was still smirking. "You see, Harold, in the Navy we pride ourselves on precision, on excellence. That chicken scratch on your arm represents the opposite. It represents chaos, lack of discipline. It's offensive to the uniform I wear." Harold remained silent. He wanted to tell Vance that the uniform was just cloth, that the man inside it was what mattered. He wanted to tell him that chaos was the only truth of the world, and that the lightning bolt was an attempt to impose order on that chaos. But he knew Vance wouldn't understand. Men like Vance thought war was a game of chess played on high-resolution monitors. They didn't know it was actually a knife fight in a closet with the lights out. "Sir," Miller said, looking up from her tablet. "His clearance is valid. Green across the board. Level 4 access." Vance looked annoyed. He snatched the badge from her hand and squinted at it. "Level 4? For a janitor? That's higher than yours, Miller. That's a mistake. It says here it was authorized by the base commander personally, 3 years ago," Miller noted. Vance scoffed. "Probably a clerical error, or maybe you just mopped the right floor for the Admiral once upon a time." Vance tossed the badge back at Harold. It hit his chest and clattered to the floor. "Pick it up," Vance commanded. Harold looked at the badge on the white tiles. Then he looked at Vance. "I said pick it up, and then get your gear and get out. I'm revoking your access to the C&C deck pending a security review. I don't like your attitude, and I definitely don't like that graffiti on your arm." Harold bent down slowly. His knees popped again. He retrieved the badge and clipped it back onto his red coveralls. "I have a job to finish, sir. The Admiral wants the floors done before the delegation arrives at 1400. I don't care what the Admiral wants right now. I am the officer of the deck, and I am telling you to leave." The tension in the room had drawn the attention of the other operators. Men and women at the consoles had turned in their swivel chairs, watching the spectacle. Most looked uncomfortable. Bullying an old man was low, even for Vance, but no one spoke up. Rank was a heavy blanket that smothered dissent, except for one person. In the corner of the room, a civilian IT contractor named Sarah had been replacing a hard drive. She had stopped working 5 minutes ago. She had seen Harold every Tuesday for 2 years. He always brought her peppermint candies. He never spoke much, but he always asked about her kids. She watched Vance toss the badge. She watched the old man bend down, and she felt a burning heat in her stomach that had nothing to do with the servers. She pulled her phone from her pocket. She wasn't military. She didn't fall under the USMC in the same direct way. She texted a contact she had saved, simply as Major Lewis, Security Liaison. Trouble in C&C. Vance is power tripping on Mr. Beck. It's getting ugly. He's kicking him out over a tattoo. She hit send. Then she stood up. "Is this really necessary, Commander?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling slightly. "He's just doing his job." Vance spun around. "Stay in your lane, tech support. This is a military matter regarding uniform standards and security. It's an old man with a mop, Vance. You're being cruel." Vance's face reddened. "That is enough. One more word and I'll have you escorted out with him." He turned back to Harold, who had not moved toward the door. "Are you deaf, old man? I said move." Harold sighed. It was a deep, resonant sound that seemed to come from the bottom of a well. "I cannot leave, sir. The buffer is heavy. I cannot take it down the stairs alone, and the service elevator is broken. I need to finish the quadrant so I can stow it in the closet here. I don't care if you have to carry it on your back. Get out." Vance reached out and grabbed Harold's shoulder, his fingers digging into the loose fabric of the coveralls. It was a physical escalation, a crossing of the line. Harold's reaction was instinctive. He didn't strike back. He simply shifted his weight, dropping his center of gravity and rotating his shoulder a fraction of an inch. Vance's hand slipped off as if he had tried to grab a greased pole. Harold remained perfectly still, his hands resting on the buffer handle. "Do not touch me, son," Harold said. The "sir" was gone. The voice was no longer gravel, it was granite. Vance stumbled back, his ego bruised more than his hand. He looked at his hand, then at Harold, his eyes wide with shock and rage. Did you just assault a superior officer?" Vance sputtered, his voice rising to a shout. "I stood still," Harold said calmly. "You lost your balance." "That's it." Vance unclipped the radio from his belt. "Master-at-arms to the command deck. I have a hostile non-combatant, possible intoxication. I need immediate removal and detention." The room went dead silent. Calling the master-at-arms on an 80-year-old janitor was insanity. It was career suicide, or it should have been. But Vance was too far gone, riding the adrenaline of his own embarrassment. Harold didn't flinch. He just looked at the tattoo on his arm again. The lightning bolt, the diamond, the dots. Worth it, he thought. If this is how it ends, getting dragged out by the MPs, so be it. I've been through worse. Miles away, in the plush, carpeted hallway of the headquarters building, the elevator doors slid open. Captain Julian Iron Sterling, United States Marine Corps, stepped out. He was a mountain of a man, his chest covered in ribbons that told the story of Fallujah, Marja, and places the public didn't know about. He was flanked by 2 gunnery sergeants and a Navy captain. They were heading toward the command and control center for the scheduled briefing. Sterling's phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a forwarded message from Major Lewis, who knew Sterling was heading to that exact location. "Heads up. Situation in C&C. Officer harassing an elderly staff member. Says the guy has a weird diamond and lightning bolt tattoo." Sterling stopped walking. The gunnery sergeants stopped instantly, sensing the change in their leader's posture. The Navy captain looked back. "Something wrong, Julian?" Sterling stared at the phone screen. The description was specific. Diamond, lightning bolt, 3 dots. It wasn't a common design. It wasn't something you picked off a wall in a tattoo parlor in San Diego. It was a kill marker unit patch from a specific deep recon platoon operating in the Ashau Valley in 1968, a unit that technically didn't exist on paper for 20 years, a unit known as the Ghost Walkers. There were only 12 men in that unit. Only 4 came home. Sterling knew this because his father had been the radio operator for that platoon. His father had died 6 years ago, but he had drawn that symbol on napkins at the dinner table 1,000 times. He had told Julian the stories of the men who bore it. Specifically, the story of the team leader, the man they called the Wraith, the man who had carried Julian's father 4 miles on a shattered ankle through NVA lines. Sterling looked at the Navy captain. "We need to get to the C&C room. Now." "Why? What is it?" "Someone is about to make the biggest mistake of their life," Sterling said, his voice low and dangerous. Back in the command center, the air was toxic. Vance was pacing, waiting for the MPs. Harold was leaning against the wall, arms crossed, the offending tattoo on full display. "You are going to regret this," Vance spat. "You think you can disrespect the chain of command?" "I respect the rank," Harold said softly. "I am struggling with the man wearing it." Vance lunged forward again, losing control. "I am going to—" The double doors at the back of the room flew open with a force that rattled the glass partitions. "Attention on deck," roared one of the gunnery sergeants. The volume was absolute. It wasn't a request, it was a detonation. Every person in the room snapped to attention. Chairs spun, spines straightened. Even Vance froze, his hand halfway to Harold's chest. Captain Sterling strode into the room, his boots hammering a rhythm on the floor that Harold knew well. The Navy captain followed, looking concerned. Vance recovered quickly. He snapped a salute, a smug look returning to his face. "Captain Sterling, sir, apologies for the disturbance. I was just neutralizing a security threat. We have a non-compliant contractor who assault." Sterling didn't even look at Vance. He walked right past him. He walked past the banks of monitors. He walked past the stunned ensigns. He stopped 3 feet in front of Harold Beck. The room held its breath. Vance turned, confused. "Sir, that is the individual." "He is." "Silence, Lieutenant," the Navy captain ordered, stepping up behind Sterling. Sterling stared at Harold. He looked at the red coveralls. He looked at the mop bucket. He looked at the face that time had eroded but not defeated. And then he looked at the arm. The diamond, the lightning bolt, the 3 dots. Sterling's eyes traced the faded ink. He saw the scarring underneath it. He saw the history that Vance had called scribbles. Harold looked back at the giant Marine. He didn't know this man, but he recognized the look in his eyes. It was the look of someone who knew. Sterling slowly raised his right hand. His posture was perfect. His hand snapped to the brim of his cover in a salute that was sharper and more respectful than anything Vance had ever offered anyone in his life. He held the salute. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. The silence in the room was deafening. A captain saluting a janitor. It broke every rule of protocol. It shattered the hierarchy. "Sir," Sterling said, his voice thick with emotion. It is an honor to be in your presence. Harold slowly uncrossed his arms. He straightened his posture, shedding 20 years of age in a single movement. He returned the salute, his hand flat, his fingers aligned. A reflex burned into his nervous system half a century ago. At ease, Captain, Harold said. Sterling cut the salute and turned to the room. He looked at the faces of the sailors and officers. Finally, his gaze landed on Vance. Vance looked like he had swallowed a live grenade. "Do you know who this is, Lieutenant?" Sterling asked. His voice was quiet, which made it terrifying. He is the janitor, sir. Beck. Harold Beck. Sterling turned back to Harold. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the arm. Harold nodded. Sterling reached out and gently turned Harold's arm so the room could see the tattoo. "This is not gang tagging, Lieutenant. This is the unit crest of the 3rd Force Reconnaissance Company, Team Siderwinder, specifically the deep insertion element operational in 1968. Sterling looked around the room, ensuring everyone was listening. They were known as the Ghost Walkers. They operated behind enemy lines for weeks at a time without resupply. Their job was to locate NVA artillery positions that were decimating our bases. This tattoo, the diamond represents the pressure they were under, the lightning bolt represents the strike, and the 3 dots. Sterling paused, his throat tightening. The 3 dots represent the 3 men from the 5-man team who didn't make it out of the Ashau Valley. Sterling turned to Harold. "My father was Corporal James Sterling. He was your radio operator." Harold's eyes widened. A crack appeared in his stoic mask. "Jimmy? You're Jimmy's boy?" "Yes, sir. He told me about you. He told me about the hill. He told me how you carried him. He told me that he bled all over your back for 4 miles. And every time he told you to leave him, you told him to shut up and keep the radio dry." Harold looked down at the floor, blinking rapidly. "He kept it dry." Harold whispered. "He called in the birds, saved us all." Sterling turned back to Vance. Vance was pale. He looked as if he wanted to phase through the floor. "You asked if this man had a history," Sterling said, his voice rising, filling the command center with command presence. "This man has a Navy Cross. This man has 3 Purple Hearts. This man is the reason my father lived to have me. He is the reason I am standing here today." Sterling took a step toward Vance. "And you mocked him. You threatened him. You tried to throw him out because you didn't like the ink on his skin." "Sir, I didn't know," Vance stammered. He looked at the Navy captain for help, but the captain was glaring at him with equal disgust. "Ignorance is not a defense for cruelty, Lieutenant," the Navy captain said. "You judged a book by a cover you couldn't even read." Sterling looked at the buffer Harold had been using. "You asked him to leave." Yes, sir." Sterling turned to Harold. "Mr. Beck, nobody is kicking you out of anywhere. In fact, if you are willing, I would be honored if you would join us for the briefing. We are discussing asymmetrical warfare tactics in dense terrain. I think your insight might be more valuable than anything on these screens." Harold looked at the buffer, then at Sterling. "I have to finish the floor, Captain. The Admiral likes it shiny." "We have people for that," the Navy captain interjected. "Ensign Miller." "Yes, sir." Miller jumped up. "Finish the floor." Miller didn't hesitate. She practically vaulted over her desk. "It would be my honor, sir." She took the handle of the buffer from Harold. She smiled at him, a genuine beaming smile. "Thank you for your service, Mr. Beck." Harold looked at his hands, free of the machine for the first time in hours. He looked at Vance. The lieutenant was shrinking, looking for a hole to crawl into. Harold walked over to Vance. The room tensed, expecting a blow or at least a shout. Harold stopped a foot from Vance. He spoke softly, so only Vance and Sterling could hear. "You got good boots, son. Keep 'em clean, but don't forget that the mud is where the work gets done. And the men in the mud, they don't look like posters. They look like me." Harold tapped his own chest, right over his heart. "Respect isn't about the stripes on your collar. It is about how you treat the man who cleans your boots." Vance looked down. "Yes, sir." Harold turned to Sterling. "You look like him, you know. Jimmy. Same chin." Sterling smiled, a rare, genuine expression. "I hope I'm half the man he was." "You're doing all right," Harold said. Sterling gestured toward the door. "After you, sir." Harold Beck, the janitor with the prison tattoo, straightened his coveralls. He walked past the rows of stunned technicians, past the blinking servers and toward the exit. The captain of the Marines walked a step behind him, to his right, in the position of deference. As they passed the threshold, the image of the tattoo seemed to flash in Harold's mind one last time. The jungle heat, the smell of rain, the needle dipping into the mixture of ash and gunpowder, Jimmy holding his arm steady, Hold still, Harry. This is gonna hurt. Harold gritting his teeth. Pain is just information, Jimmy. Finish it. The design taking shape on his skin. A promise. A bond. A map of where they had been, and who they had left behind. In the command center, the door closed. The silence lingered for a long time. Ensign Miller turned on the buffer. The motor hummed to life. She began to clean the floor where the hero had stood, guiding the machine carefully, respectfully over the invisible footprints of a giant. Vance stood alone in the center of the room. He looked at his own pristine uniform. He looked at the coffee cup in his hand. Slowly, he walked over to the trash can and dropped the cup inside. He sat down at his station, pulled up the personnel file for Harold Beck and began to read. As he read the citations, the details of Hill 881, the ambushes, the rescues, the color drained from his face until he was ghost white. He read about the shrapnel. He read about the malaria. He read about the refusal to evacuate. He looked at his own arm, smooth and unmarked. He realized then that he had never really been in the Navy. He had just been wearing the costume. Harold Beck was the Navy. The screen blurred as Vance stared at the words conspicuous gallantry. Outside, in the hallway, Harold and Sterling walked side by side. So Harold asked, "Does the coffee in the briefing room taste like mud?" Sterling laughed. "Worse. It tastes like JP5 fuel and burnt plastic." Harold smiled. "Good. Just like home." They turned the corner. Two warriors from different worlds bound by the same code, leaving the silence of the command center behind them. The legend of the unassuming hero with the strange tattoo would remain in that room long after the floor was dry, a permanent mark on the memory of everyone who had witnessed it. The story of the Ghost Walkers wasn't finished. It had just found a new audience. And this time nobody was laughing. Call to action. If this story of unassuming valor moved you, please like and share to honor the veterans in your life. Subscribe to Veteran Valor for more stories of heroes hiding in plain sight.